In today's update, Johnson & Johnson is on the verge of becoming the third vaccine to receive emergency use authorization in the U.S. The single-dose vaccine is expected to be authorized as soon as this Friday. The company now says it's ready to deliver 20 million doses by the end of March. Johnson & Johnson, their vaccine, was found to be 85% effective in clinical trials for preventing severe illness, and the company says it's 100% effective at preventing deaths. Pfizer and Moderna are also now pledging to double their production rates, telling Congress they're on track to deliver a combined 600 million doses to the U.S. by July. Protesters took to the streets in Rochester, New York, after a grand jury decided not to charge police officers involved in the death of Daniel Prude. Prude was unarmed and experiencing a mental health emergency when police put a spit hood over his head and pinned him to the ground until he stopped breathing. He died days later. New York Attorney General Letitia James, whose office took over the investigation, said her office, quote, presented the strongest case possible, but couldn't convince the jury that the officers had committed a crime. Lawyers for the 7 officers suspended for Prude's death have said they were following their training that night. And today, President Biden will sign a new executive order aimed at protecting supply chains for things like computer chips, critical ingredients for medicine, and rare earth materials, which are used to make things like smartphones. The order mandates a 100-day review of those supply chains and is part of an effort by the administration to avoid shortages of these kinds of products in the wake of the pandemic. And we're learning more about the extent of Tiger Woods' injuries after he was in a serious car crash. First responders had to pry the windshield off to pull Woods from the wreckage after his car rolled off a Los Angeles highway, leaving him with multiple leg injuries. Matt Gutman is in L.A. with the details.
This morning, authorities say Tiger Woods is lucky to have survived a wreck that crushed his car. Overnight, hours after being rushed into emergency surgery on his right leg, Tiger's team confirming he is currently awake, responsive, and recovering in his hospital room.
Person's trapped, vehicle off the side of the road.
The 45-year-old golf legend involved in a single-car rollover accident just after 7 a.m. near Los Angeles on Tuesday.
No skid marks, no braking.
Deputies say that Woods seemed lucid and calm. They also say there was no evidence of impairment, but that will be part of the investigation. In that surgery, doctors inserting a metal rod in the golf great's shin, which suffered multiple comminuted fractures, meaning his bones were shattered to splinters. Screws and pins now stabilizing broken bones in his foot and ankle, and another surgery to relieve dangerous pressure and swelling in his muscles.
It's very fortunate that Mr. Woods was able to come out of this alive.
Woods had just started to rehab from his 5th back operation, speaking about his comeback to CBS's Jim Nantz.
Tiger, 7 weeks from today, final round of the Masters. You going to be there?
Gotta hope so. I got to get there first.
You feel like
a lot of it's based on my surgeons and my doctors, and my therapists, and making sure that I do it correctly. And this is the only back I got.
Woods won his first major tournament at 21.
There it is, a win for the ages.
He's now tied for the most PGA wins ever, 82. A player for the ages, but a person who sometimes seemed troubled. In 2009, after allegations of a cheating scandal broke, he smashed his SUV near his home in Florida, and his marriage fell apart.
I am deeply sorry for my irresponsible and selfish behavior.
Then in 2017, while dealing with pain and multiple surgeries, he was found by police passed out behind the wheel of his car and arrested on a DUI charge.
You know the reason I'm out with you now?
No.
It's because you're stopped in the road.
The return to glory.
But then in 2019, an unbelievable comeback. Tiger winning his 5th Masters tournament, celebrating with his son. Very early this morning, the hospital revealing more about that emergency surgery that Tiger underwent yesterday. Apparently, they inserted a rod into his shattered lower leg area, that's sort of the shin bone, fibula, tibula area, and pins and screws into his ankle, which apparently had to be stabilized. There are additional procedures done to relieve pressure. So this was a significant surgery. Now, interestingly, LA County's fire chief told us that when they first arrived on the scene, it seemed that Tiger was trying to extricate himself from the vehicle. He realized the crash was bad. He was lucid, he was calm, but he may not have realized at the time the severity of his injuries. Diane.
Matt Gutman, thank you for that. And earlier today, our chief medical correspondent, Dr. Jennifer Ashton, discussed Tiger Woods' medical condition and what his recovery process might look like.
Jen, what more can you tell us about Tiger's injuries and the surgical procedure?
Well, Robin, first of all, this is what falls under the umbrella of a major trauma. So in general, a patient in an accident like this would be going immediately to the operating room with multiple teams of surgeons, orthopedic surgeons, likely vascular surgeons, trauma surgeons. To have this hardware put in the leg, it's called an open reduction internal fixation. So a rod goes into one of the long bones. In this case, it sounds like the tibia, and then screws and pins in the smaller bones to stabilize things. We also heard in Matt's piece an additional operation to relieve pressure. That's something called compartment syndrome, where there can be very dangerous and significant swelling in between the muscle and fascial planes in a limb. So this is a major surgery. It's a major trauma. It's a major injury.
And we're well aware of the back issues that Tiger has had. So what kind of impact could this accident have on the rest of his body?
Well, one of the things we're taught in orthopedics is to always look at the joint either above or below where an injury is. So when you talk about the back, you always have to consider the hip and the lower leg. Now there's a lower leg injury, which then just in isolation has the potential to affect the hip and back. So this is something where the teams of orthopedic surgeons, possibly with additional surgeries, and physical therapists and pain management specialists will be having their hands full for sure.
So Jen, for anyone going through a major accident like this, what is the recovery process like?
You know, Robin, after a trauma, and again, that's what this is, trauma surgery and acute trauma, we measure the recovery in baby steps. So we're talking about the next hours, days, weeks, and months. And there is the potential for this type of injury to have lifelong manifestations, but every patient is different, and their pre-existing or pre-accident condition is very important as to how they'll do in the future.
And February is American Heart Month, raising awareness about heart disease, the #1 cause of death in America. Heart disease is responsible for 1 in every 4 deaths in the U.S. Now, a new ABC News Live special takes a closer look at how you can keep your heart healthy and avoid becoming another statistic. We've got a preview of tonight's special where actress Susan Lucci opens up about her own heart health and what she wants everyone to know about early diagnosis and intervention.
I could not push this off. I couldn't deny this pressure. I was very surprised to be at the hospital.
Emmy Award-winning actress Susan Lucci revealing her health heart scare.
Hi, I'm Susan Lucci. I'm an actress.
Yes, I am.
And I am a heart survivor.
Stay tuned.
I was in very good health and always had been.
Lucci, can I get a quick picture?
In fact, I had been asked by Harper's Bazaar to do a layout with no touch-ups in a bathing suit. That's a scary thing for a woman. The first incident I had was at the beginning of October. My husband and I were in a restaurant. I felt this light pressure on my chest. I wrote it off that it was nothing. The second time it happened was a couple weeks later, and I remember thinking, do I have a new bra on? I must have a new bra on, and I knew I did. But the third time was different. I was in a boutique, and I felt what I had heard a woman describe in a TV interview. What she had felt was like an elephant pressing on her chest. And in fact, that's what I was feeling. I was scared at the same time. I couldn't believe it.
You could see the 3 layers of the stent.
She came into the hospital Friday night. The artery that Susan had involved in her problem was called the widowmaker, because if you have a blockage in that artery and that artery would close, it would cause a significant amount of damage and could be a fatal heart attack.
Hearing that I had a 90% blockage in my main artery and a 75% blockage in the adjacent artery, but not cholesterol, it turned out to be a calcium blockage.
With Susan's case, the procedure was very complex. Optical coherence tomography, or OCT, is a game changer in treating coronary artery disease. OCT lets me figure out exactly the size of stent in both branches and exactly where to place them to get the most optimal long-term result.
It's completely mind-boggling to me how wonderful the science is. I was released by noon the next day. And as I was leaving, the doctor said to me how important it was that I went to the hospital and that no one needs to die of a heart attack if they simply act on their symptoms. I came out of the hospital knowing that I had a mission.
Hey everybody, it's National Wear Red Day.
With the American Heart Association, I've had the opportunity to get the message out to women, to put themselves on their to-do list, to listen to their bodies, and if their bodies are not behaving in a way which is normal for them, to act on those symptoms. And family history is very important. My dad, who I adored, he was very athletic, but he died of heart disease.
If Susan didn't come to us when she had that pain, I suspect she would have had a life-threatening heart attack at some point in the near future.
It took a long time for it to sink in, the gravity of it. Very lucky, very grateful, very grateful.
President Biden formally lifted the Trump administration's ban on transgender people serving in the U.S. military. This morning, we're hearing from those who continued to serve even as some top military leaders wanted them gone. And we examine what life is like for LGBTQ service members a decade after the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell. Here's Devin Dwyer.
Navy Petty Officer First Class Brock Stone takes pride in his family and his fight.
I'm really big about kind of jumping in there and doing what needs to be done.
Stone's a highly trained cyber analyst at the forefront of evolving threats to national security.
I am here today because I want to remain a part of my family.
And in 2017, he joined an ACLU lawsuit against President Trump to allow transgender service members like him to keep doing their jobs.
I went to Afghanistan, I did all these things. I mean, what does that tell me? That tells me I'm not welcome. That tells me that I am not respected as myself.
The Pentagon under Trump said transgender people could only serve if they effectively suppressed their identity, assuming the gender role of their assigned sex at birth.
We became an endangered species. There weren't going to be any more of us. No one new could come out. No one new could get in.
Those that stayed describe a psychological toll.
The biggest myth is that we're something other than an ordinary sailor who is just here to do a job.
Late last month, President Joe Biden ended the Trump policy, starting a new era of open service in the U.S. military. But now trans service members and their allies are wondering how quickly tolerance will take hold in the ranks and whether the policy of inclusion will be permanent.
I'm not worried about it being able to be done. It's a question of if that senior generation can start to embrace this in a principle-centered way. I think it'll move along.
Retired General James Cartwright, former vice chairman of the Joint Chiefs, says there are lessons to be learned in the decades since gays and lesbians began serving openly.
You were being asked to live a lie. And that was the ticking time bomb that brought us to where we were when we came to the repeal.
In 2010 and 2011, Cartwright helped lay the groundwork for repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell over concerns from some of his peers.
And assimilating openly homosexual Marines into the tightly woven fabric of our combat units has strong potential for disruption at the small unit level.
In your view, was any of that borne out?
The studies were all conclusive that, one, there was no operational impact. In fact, it was just the opposite. Now, to say that there weren't issues, incidents, no, that would be wrong. There were incidents around, but to say that it had operational impact turned out to not be a case. It was a non-issue there.
You could either have the career that you'd committed your life to, or you could be honest, and you could not have both.
Retired Army Lieutenant Colonel Todd Brazil, who is gay, says the end of Don't Ask, Don't Tell vindicated military values of honesty and integrity. In May 2010, from a base in Afghanistan, Brazil penned a riveting anonymous essay that went viral and helped change minds. I want to tell the guys I eat lunch with every day about my partner, he wrote at the time. I've become so good at this lying game, it eats at my soul.
I was able to pour out my heart in a way that made it real for people, I'm told.
7 months later, the gay ban was lifted, and for the decades since, there's been no going back.
And I will tell you that makes my 17 years under Don't Ask, Don't Tell feel a hell of a lot lighter, knowing that we have generations now going forward that it won't impact.
The success of that transition cleared the way for President Obama in 2016 to allow openly transgender troops for the first time.
Your country needs you. Your country wants you.
An estimated 14,700 trans service members were in active duty or the reserves before Trump took office. The majority were transgender women, less than a quarter transgender men. They've served in all military branches and in war zones for years. And soon, Lieutenant Colonel Bree Fram will bring her expertise to the new U.S. Space Force.
When I was working in the Pentagon, I worked for a new boss, and I told him that I was trans and why I was important. And about 10 months later, he retired. And before he did, he called me into his office and he said, "You know what? You broke my stereotype. Just by coming to work and getting the job done every day, you smashed my expectation of who and what a transgender person is."
Fram is the highest-ranking openly transgender officer in the Department of Defense and helps lead a growing network of trans active service members called Sparta.
One thing I can point to is that I've held command position. Several others have as well. And the challenge there is not just about me, but about bringing people along and being able to do this from a position of even higher visibility.
Chief Petty Officer Melody Stackhour of Virginia, the senior enlisted leader in her Navy unit, says visibility is key.
You know, one of the things that senior enlisted leaders see is a sailor who's doing her best to be excellent and to take care of sailors and to do all of the things that Chief Petty Officers do. The fact that I'm trans is the least interesting thing about me.
Have you ever worried about harassment or even violence?
It may always be, something in the back of my mind. And certainly, in the junior ranks, when people are still developing that network and don't necessarily have that same level of support structure, they may be more concerned about it.
Groundbreaking new research commissioned by the Defense Department finds LGBT troops face an elevated risk of harassment and abuse.
Over 80% of LGBT service members had experienced sexual harassment, compared to about 50% of non-LGBT service members. Is a really important first step is just trying to understand the lived experiences of LGBT service members so that we can shape services and programs and resources around what they need.
18 countries, including allies Israel, Canada, and the UK, have allowed transgender service for years and could be models for America. Those case studies back up independent research in the U.S., which found allowing transgender troops has minimal impact on readiness and healthcare costs.
I do think that the more time that passes with a group of people being visible and demonstrating that they are first-class citizens, just like their peers, just like everyone else, the harder it is to put the toothpaste back in the tube and reverse those gains.
Today, 66% of active duty soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines say they're comfortable serving with transgender peers.
Is the issue of open transgender service settled?
I'd like to believe that after 4 years of this administration, the concept of military service without transgender people will be just as unconscionable as it is without African Americans, without women, without lesbians, gays, and bisexuals. But we're not quite there yet. We're still at a place where a new administration could flip the switch and return to us being banned from service.
For at least the next 4 years, that switch is on acceptance, allowing transgender troops a chance to be their best selves and show how they help make the country stronger and safer in the process.
In the community at large, and certainly for myself, it has been relief. I'm still here. I'm not going anywhere. Trans people aren't going anywhere. Trans people have been around for centuries.
For ABC News Live, I'm Devin Dwyer in Washington.